History is important because right now where we are now today would never have happened without what happened there in the past. He was right at the top of the tree hill. It wasn't if he was going to catch a record carp, it was when. It was the same question that came up both times. Jack, tell us about the red mine monsters. Can you imagine coming home after a meeting in the car, you know, you and, I don't know, Mike Starkey or somebody like that. You know, you think I'm mad for it now. 40 years ago, it was nearly impossible. I made just one cast into the mire with a controller and a tiny bit of mixer. About 6 foot away, this fish accelerated, you know, and I mean, I'd written about it extensively. I was attached to one. You know, I was shit myself. Can't even remember any of us even, you know, accidentally hooking one and losing it or anything like that. It was only when Men from London appeared in the school holidays in August 1959 that I saw one on the bank, and about 3 or 4 pound. It was a monster, an absolute monster to us. I mean, I was 7 or 8 at the time, 8 or 9, around that age, mid-50s. And of course we saw it, and the chap showed us what he caught it on, right? And it was floating, you know, crust. He told us, make sure you get stuff on the corner there, you know, if it's slightly stale. Oh, brilliant, absolutely brilliant to do that. And of course then the seemingly impossible carp suddenly became catchable. And though I had done a picture of the very first one, I do have a picture, which I'm sure I'll dig out for you, of some of the 1959 carp. 1961, I caught my first double, and crazy things started to happen. Like, when I look back, when we moved a couple of times ago, here is a Thomas the Tank Engine, but what the hell's that got to do with fishing, you're saying? I kept this from when I was a kid, so a 5 or 6 year old. If you want to know the kind of bloke you're dealing with here, it was the only one that had fishing represented in it. And then at school, the last year of schooling, which was 1960, I made, like every other kid in our class, this scrapbook. It had mottled end papers, it had a drawn on cover, it had a bit of blocking on the front, and it contained 20 blank pages. Now, every kid in that school had football players, steam engines. Oh dear, what did little old Chris Ball have? Carp captures cut out of angling times. Here's my class here, 1AX. So it was 1960 when I was 14 years old. So yeah, just full of carp, all the carp ones. So you can see the kind of nutcase I was turning into at quite an early age. In 1961, I caught my first 10 pounder, free-lined ledgered potato. Sounds archaic nowadays. My pal had caught one on the trip before. We had no car, obviously. It was taken by my parents or his parents. I was 15 years old in 1961. And I mean, it's so long ago, this. I say this, it makes people smile, but it's before the Beatles. That's how long ago this was. And to a 15-year-old kid, a 10-pound 4-ounce mirror carp was a monster. It was we talked about for weeks. Blimey, a few weeks later I caught another one as well, a little bit bigger as well. So this was Cut Mill, or the tarn at Cut Mill, Farnham Angling Water. When we found that the Britain's Pond ticket was held by Guildford Angling Society, still is. And we found they had exchange tickets with Farnham. I don't know how we found that out, somehow or other. And the first time we ever went, my mate Chris Powell caught a 11-pound common monster fish. The next visit I caught one, and so it went on. Now, this is something that modern day anglers will find it quite hard to believe, because they catch this in a day now, right? But between 1961 and 1969, when I applied to join the British Carp Study Group when it first started, I'd caught a grand total of 29 double-figure carp in 8 years, right? You know, 3 or 4 a year. And I was doing well, you know, I'd lost a few. And I had pictures of most of them, and I got into the British Carp Study Group, you know, I was member 28.
Now, Chris, the British Carp Study Group is 50 years old.
Yeah.
When you reflect on its importance and the significance to the British carp scene of that particular group now, what comes to mind?
Right, what comes to mind is that it, Peter Mohan, the driving force behind it all, worked tirelessly to A, promote the group, B, bring as many different fractions throughout the country together with the one sole purpose of, you know, trying to increase our knowledge in how to catch more and bigger carp, or just to catch carp in some instances. He was great for that. He was an organiser, a letter writing, massive letter writer, very active in the angling press of the day, stuff like that. And it was a significant organisation because though the Carp Catchers Club was the first one back in the 50s, it was very restricted membership. This one, even though you had to apply and prove what you caught and so on and so forth, it grew and grew, and it grew so much as the first formal conferences, carp-only conferences, were created by Peter Mohan and the British Carp Study Group. Some of the early ones I remember speaking out, and certainly they were events that got bigger and bigger. This is some 10 years before the Carp Society started. So yeah, pretty important. Information was freely flowing. Weren't quite so as later on in the 70s, didn't become quite so secret squirrels we did then, but yeah, and I met people from the northwest, from Devon, from Cornwall, from Essex, from Kent. It was marvellous. I went to Kent for the first time in 1967. I remember borrowing my dad's car. God, he lent me his car for the weekend, which was amazing. And I came away, I fished at Horton Kirby. I met somebody in the close season, same age as me, a chap who was a Kent carp angler, and became friendly with him, and he invited me there. And I caught a few fish, but I went the following year as well, 1968, I fished at Brooklands then. I caught a 12-pounder, which was, you know, I was very pleased about, Brooklands carp. But I came back with several, you know, gems. The most obvious one was sausage meat as bait, and secondly, rods that were made for long distance casting, big rings, sparse big rings. Never seen any of this. I mean, Kent lads were quite a way in front of anything that was going on in Surrey at the time. And that came, you know, that all this mix came about through, you know, being more active and getting more info through the British Carp Study Group. And I did attend the other week at the 50th one. They produced a marvellous book to go with it. It was a day, I was only there a day, it was a day full of laughter and fun, which it should be.
And do you reflect on its shrinking influence, Chris, as much as what it did in fact produce back in the day?
When you say shrinking influence?
The fact that it is very much now on the sidelines of the carp scene. Right,
okay, yeah, it got overtaken. I mean, Peter Mohan, schoolboy, or head school teacher attitude, did rub some people up. Sometimes he would sort of talk at you, not to you, so to speak. And the threatening start, and it was a threatening start of the Carp Society, then sort of started to kick them into touch, and here was a much more sort of free and liberal society which anybody could join. You didn't have to fill in forms and, you know, and then remember what you put on the form, you know, and all things like that happened before. I mean, okay, there was a little kudos in having the BCSG badge, you know, and having the card, and, you know, blimey, I'm a member 50 years later. But yes, it's still going. Carp fishing is, as you know, it's a a massive global. I mean, the UK, we taught the rest of the world how to catch them, you know, and now it's unless you're involved in the trade, people have got, you know, the normal bloke on the bank, carp fishing, has got no real influence of how huge it is. I always remember when Italy took off back in the 90s, Cliff Fox went off Fox International, went through a distributor called Technicarp, and I met one or two at Technicarp, quite a big distributor of all fishing tackle, but they took on, and at that stage, Italy, they hadn't come from a bent pin and a cane, but they'd come from a very primitive form of fishing. They had skipped 4 decades of development here in the UK, and that went down to 18 months. And it became so huge so quickly. I mean, Lockie piled in there, but Cliff, realising the potential there, and largely he was a bed chair and an early buzzer manufacturer, he bought Technicarp. He bought the distributor and went in, and the gear went in. So things like that, it's just, you know, and the British Carp Selling Group, you know, got that little niche in there, but it's just a massive worldwide industry. I mean, I was at Bob Baker's when Bob had Richworth. I was there a few years back, and there was an articulated lorry outside being loaded.
If you characterise spring, you get lovely sunny days like today. We're sitting in a t-shirt. At 7 o'clock tonight, it'll be freezing cold, and we may have grass frost by tomorrow morning. So you're getting, you know, warm days, cold nights. So although Mother Nature is, you know, the fish will definitely be responding to that, and light levels have increased. It's bright, but the water temperature is still cold. Some of the very best carp baits straight off the supermarket shelf. Sweet corn is quite salty. Bread is quite salty. Now people say bread's not salty, but actually if you look at the salt content of bread, it's some breads that you buy from the supermarket are more salty than ready salted crisps. If you're that little parasite on the fish's flank and you get rammed into clay, it could just suck you straight off, but it will certainly clag up your ability to breathe, and then you'd let go.
Where's a carp likely to take zigs out of the equation? We'll get onto those in a little while. Where's a carp likely to want to feed after dark? You know, where's that happy?
I would say in the deeper water.
Drop
Yeah,
back down
I
into
wouldn't.
that cold water.
Yeah, I would say in the deeper water. You know,
And would that not be colder than the shallow
well,
water?
again, it depends on the day and the mixing.
Yeah.
You know, if we get big winds, then it can change the whole thing. So, look for signs of fish. Definitely. You know, at first light, be watching the water like a hawk. And if you're seeing fish showing over deep water, that's probably where they spent the night. One thing I would say, and you often see fish showing quite a lot in the springtime, is that the carp's ability to deal with its parasites builds up slower than the activity of the parasites in the spring. So fish parasites get a bit of a head start on the fish in the spring. Now, if you're a carp and you've got, let's say, some argillus, some fish lice on you, or leeches, or skin flukes, those parasites are becoming quite active as the water starts to creep up, and they get active before the fish. And so the fish can be quite irritated, and you'll see fish showing quite a lot. That doesn't mean they're tearing up the bottom, it means they're scratchy. And we'll see it on the farm, and you see it in you know, tanks or ponds of fish, that they become quite agitated in the spring. Often the mucus is there's quite a lot of mucus on the fish, and that is a response to those parasites. And if they're jumping a lot on the surface, they're probably trying to knock off parasites, or flanking, you know, like when I say rubbing on the bottom.
Rubbing, yeah.
And they're trying to knock off parasites. Obviously, those are really useful indicators of where the fish are, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're tearing the bottom to pieces. They're just agitated.
Yeah, I always use in the spring when you start to hear those boshes. You know, the ones that to me, that is like, right, the carp in this lake now are they are
fully awake.
Yeah, they're not drifting about lazily anymore. When they're doing that,
Yeah, they're active.
and that is, like you say, that's clean.
Head and shouldering. Head and shouldering. If I see fish just poking their nose out and dropping back in a few bubbles, that's feeding fish.
That's feeding. But
when they're coming out and going bang, they're trying to knock parasites.
They're trying to
off
get rid of
themselves. And you know, the parasites, they probably irritate the fish, but they're doing us a bit of a service, because the fish jumps and you go.
You can't see yellow pop about it, don't you? Okay, so kind of the same sort of subject, your parasites and whatnot. Natural food at this point of the year in a lake, is it almost, I always picture, I could be totally wrong here, that by the time you get to the end of the winter, everything's kind of at its about to, so it's reset stage almost.
Yeah, there's
like
still
all
natural
nature.
food. So there will be bloodworm, for example.
Yes,
So
yep.
even harvesting the ponds on the farm in the last couple of weeks, as we've drained the water down and been wading about in the silt, there's loads of bloodworm in some of the ponds. So there's still bloodworm there. So still natural food there. So, you know, and you've also potentially got zooplankton bloom, so Daphnia water fleas up in the water column, which the fish might well be feeding on as well. And that's hard. It's hard to imagine that a big carp, you know, something like that, you can imagine it eating a water flea in mid-water, but a 30-pound carp or a 40-pound carp's a very big fish. It's hard to picture that going through a cloud of plankton and hoovering it up, but you're going to have to take my word for it.
Whales do.
Yeah, they do. But they've got a very well-designed, you know, feeding system to deal with that. It's hard to imagine a big carp doing that, but you have to take my word for it, having watched them do it over and over and over. They're literally going along, hoovering up the plankton mid-water. So.
And are there, you know, many varieties of natural food now coming to life in the spring?
Yeah,
or not?
Snail. Yeah, there's
is it all
there's a
everything?
range of natural foods there, and obviously the carp will tap into whatever is specifically the most abundant in that environment. So if you're fishing a silty lake, it might be bloodworm. If it could be snails in a gravel pit, you might get a bloom of small snails in a gravel pit which they're going to eat. It might be baby crayfish. It could be pea mussels, caddis, shrimps. You know, whatever. Carp are brilliantly adapted, Elliot, to home in on what is the most easily available food source for the least amount of effort. A bit like us. Yeah. We all love fast food, we all like chocolate bars because it's quick and easy. The fish are the same. They're not going to spend hours digging to try and find a bloodworm if they can go up onto a shallow area and find millions of snails. They'll go for the easy option.
And fly hatches are, you know, they're quite an exciting thing in the springtime. You know, you get the carp go wild. They're hard to catch, though, aren't they?
Yes, they're up in the water, and it's like we talked about with the zooplankton. You know, they're feeding mid-water, and that's where those guys that fish jig rigs and they really know what they're doing. often cash in and catch them. Yeah.
What causes what causes those flies?
Those are insects coming out of the sediment, out of the benthos. They're coming up and they're coming towards the surface, and they hatch on the surface. So they come up, and of course in that stage they are very, very vulnerable. If you imagine you're a little invertebrate that's lived in the sediment amongst the rotting debris on the bottom of the lake, and you think, right, it's a nice sunny afternoon, I'm going to hatch. You've got to get to the surface, and then you're flying. And of course that stage from getting from the bottom to the surface with a little eat me tattooed on your forehead, you're going to get wolfed down, and everything eats them.
And can we predict this as whenever I've seen a fly hatch, you sit there and you go, oh my God, you see the birds come.
Everything.
You never expect it though. It's always, it will happen at some point.
Yeah.
Is there a way of...
I think it's a bit of experience, and different lakes react differently as well, but often warm weather in the spring is perfect, isn't it? That lovely settled warm weather. I mean, it's interesting at the moment, although, again, going back to our lovely warm days, and when the viewers are watching this, we might have had a change in the weather, but at the moment it feels lovely in the day, but I'm not seeing much frog spawn yet. But if you think for those amphibians that are wanting to breed in really shallow water, they like to lay their eggs in water that sort of depth, that water at night, which is when they like to breed, because they don't like to do it in the middle of the afternoon because the heron has them.
Something will get eaten,
they tend to breed in the dark, in the nocturnal hours. They are very, very cold, aren't they? We're having hard frosts at night, so the whole Mother Nature's well geared into those temperature shifts.
And everything, I'm assuming, wants it to just be warm as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think we're not alone, yeah.
Okay, so from fly hatches, you mentioned zig fishing.
Yeah.
No doubt about it, it's a good way of catching carp, isn't it, at this time
without
of year?
doubt, yeah. I'm a terrible zig rig fisherman, but...
You've caught some nice ones, I'm pretty sure. How important would you say it would be to really think about the depth you're fishing your zigs? And I would say, I've always I like zig fishing, always paid quite a lot of attention to it. Certainly in more recent years, you see a lot more people catching them. Zigging always, historically I found, was always about being up in the water. It's not like that now.
No.
Some lakes, you hear loads are getting caught on zigs, you turn out and they're getting caught on 4-footers, 3-footers.
Yeah. I think the thing about zig rigs, which I think is why they are so devastatingly effective as an angling technique, is if you are a carp feeding on the bed of a lake, you are in a position where you can hold yourself absolutely static. You can control the suction with which you feed. You're probably, if it's in a clear gravel pit, you can see clearly, particularly if it's in shallow water, in bright light, you can see very, very clearly. They've got good colour vision. They're looking at every detail of the bottom. We already chatted a bit before we started filming about how small a speck they could see. We know that they can see something virtually the size of a pinhead, on clean substrate. So when they're feeding like that, any fine bits of your rig tuning that aren't perfect, slightly blunt hook, too long a hook link, a badly presented bait, they don't take it, or they suck it up and they spit it back out. And if they get hooked, we've both seen big fish shut rigs up, get hooked, and then just stay absolutely static, and the mouth goes like that for a second or two, and the hook falls out, and they carry on to the next bit of food. If you're zig rig fishing, it's straight up off that lead. That is a cruising fish. It's not going up to it and going, what's that, before it takes it. It's cruising along, suddenly something comes into view. What's that? So it just sucks it in, and before it's moving. It's like a massive submarine going through the water. It's got an inertia and momentum to it. It keeps moving, and the moment it sucks it in, that hook link is tightening, and before it thinks, oh, it's lifted the lead off the bottom, the hook's gone in, and you've got a bite. I think, and having watched fish take zigs in crystal clear water in sort of 3 foot, you see them go up to them. They don't stop, they just carry on and just take them and carry on, and then they go off like a rocket. And I think that's the beauty of that technique. There is no play, and it's a bit like when you fish a chod rig. It's the same. There is no play. And
coiled spring.
Yeah, and that's the zig rigs for me is a killer if you can get the depth right and find the fish, because if they suck it in, they're nailed. And I know you read some of the articles you see of people that are very effective at catching zig rig on zigs, but often they get the depth right, and then they catch real weird fish as well that never get caught in the bottom, but that makes perfect sense. So if you've got an old carp that's learnt the ropes, he's absolutely in immaculate condition, his mouth's perfect, so his feeding apparatus is absolutely perfect, it's feeding on the bottom, it can see the detail, it knows what the trap looks like, and it might suck it up, not spook, spit it back out. But in a zig rig fishing situation, that's a very different game. He sucks it in, and he don't get a split second, he's hooked. So yeah, I think it's a great method.
All this practice that did make perfect goes out the window.
Yeah, it's very hard to learn that trick.
What about size of zig baits? I spoke to my mate yesterday. I said, I'm going out with Scotty. What questions do you want to ask him now? And this is one he mentioned. And interestingly, it's something that, you know, same with you. I talk to so many carp anglers doing the job I do. I know one in particular does very well on 15mm pop-ups, which to a lot of people, I think the classic, like, you get the experienced zig angler who uses little bits of foam, and then, you know, his mate might have a go and he whacks a 15mm pop-up on, and you think, oh, that's not
never
how you do
gonna
it.
go.
They always catch them though, don't they?
Yeah.
And actually, another friend of mine, he was catching on, I think it was 35 or 40mm pop-ups on zigs. So massive, you know, and in the spring, we go fishing with 15, 16mm pop-ups. We cast them at a showing fish. You wouldn't cast 8mm pop-ups at the showing fish as confidently as you would a 16mm.
You'll miss it.
Is it the same on a zig? Do you
I think so, yeah. But again, if you're a carp, a big carp, obviously not like little doubles, but if you're a big carp and